Hey, hi everybody. It is Friday night, free therapy night. You ask any question you want. I'm just waiting to get on the air and I'll be hosting my radio show at the same time. I just was running a couple minutes late and I didn't want to let anyone here think that I wasn't going to be able to do the show tonight. So I'm here, whether to your delight or to your chagrin, here we are to tackle some more difficult questions.
And therefore, without any ado, here's Todd Ritchey.
Hello, everybody. This is Todd Ritchey from WZML LP in Bryn Mawr. Thanks for tuning in. This is 92.9 on the main line in Philadelphia and parts of New Jersey. And for those of you in Facebook Live land, I want to say a shout out. And I'm hearing feedback. Oh, there we go. Perfect. So tonight, as every night, I am your host of Addiction in America. And Addiction in America, we're going to be talking about, it's not just addiction, of course, it's a broader definition of addiction. I have co-developed a theory of human behavior that I have extrapolated and developed my own model called the Neuro alignment model and Neuro alignment therapy. It talks a lot about the brain and anthropology and biology, sort of mixes these sciences together, and what I'm hoping is that using this as a framework or a unified model for understanding human behavior at a deeper level, that on Friday nights and any night of the week, you'll be able to ask me almost any question at all that you want about human behavior. I don't just have this model. Of course, I have vast experience in the field with working with people, first as an interventionist and a counselor, life coach, and a bounty hunter, an exorcist, all of those things. Not that I'm professionally licensed as a bounty hunter or an exorcist. It just seems arbitrarily these are the types of things that interventionists end up doing. So yeah, I'm sure I could write another book just on some of the bizarre stories, and maybe one night I'll get another interventionist on here and we'll just go back and forth and tell shark stories. It is bizarre, some of the experiences that I have been through. So tonight, though, is Friday night question answer, Friday night free therapy here on Addiction in America. And so I really want audience participation. First of all, I just have to say that any of the opinions that you hear are going to be specifically those of your host. That's me, Todd Ritchey, host of Addiction in America, and not necessarily those opinions of the ownership of WZML LP in Bryn Mawr. So now that we've got that out of the way, if I could encourage you tuning in on Facebook, you Facebookers, I appreciate your support. And if there's anything that you're dealing with right now, before you even get started in writing your questions down, I have a laundry list of questions already from earlier today. And so I have lots to go through, but I'm going to always prioritize the people that are live. And if you're listening in Philadelphia, I'll give out my I will give out my website, and on my website will be my email address, but I'm also going to give out my cell phone number so that if you want to text me right now, questions live on the air, then I will field those questions to the best of my ability, running them through the filter of the answer model, of the neuro alignment model, and apply them to the best of my ability towards your specific questions. Okay, so first of all, let me do that. You can check me out and find us on triluminate.com. That's TR, my initials, Todd Ritchey, TR, and then the word illuminate.com. Triluminate or Triluminate, however you feel like pronouncing it, is fine with me. And you can reach me there via email, a variety of other social mediums. You can also purchase our books there and learn a little bit more about the methodology and the model. You can also text me now to area code 604-356-9197. If you need to call or you have somebody who's in desperate need, we have 1-800 numbers on the website. Of course, I can't respond to those right now. And certainly if there's any emergency whatsoever, call 911 now and get some help. I'm hoping we have a little bit of fun tonight. I've got some questions already, and some of them are pretty heavy. Some of them are a little spicy, and some of them are very sophisticated and nuanced. So hopefully we're going to cover the gamut here and have questions that might sort of specifically apply to you in your life as well. So those of you listening on Facebook Live, there's a little button there, I believe, and you can invite your friends. You can share it, but you can also invite your friends. So if you know any friends that are in relationship or have chronic pain issues or addiction issues or neuroses, or they're dealing with some sort of relationship dynamic challenge or parenting issue, it doesn't matter to me. I feel pretty confident that I can address most of those issues. So please share this with your friends, and let's go viral. It sounds like such a negative thing. It almost sounds like we're going to get some sort of a bug, and then we're going to have some pandemic. And the world will come to an end because I keep telling people, let's go viral. Anyways, help a brother out. Will you guys? Come on. So our first question of the night, and at any point, hi guys, at any point, jump in and throw your questions my way. Of course, we are still dealing with the aftermath, and I wouldn't even call it the aftermath in a sense, well, I guess it is, of the election results. And, you know, I'm seeing some very inspiring things, and I'm seeing some really ugly things. Certainly, racism and extreme racists have raised their ugly head, and that's heartbreaking. They're always waiting for an opportunity like this, and really on both sides. Racism and bigotry on both sides. And these extremists are trying to present themselves as the norm. And obviously they're not the norm. And I think the worst thing that's happening right now, before I get onto the questions, really to me, we could go back and forth. We could explain what happens in the brain when people get afraid, what happens when people win, what happens when people lose, sort of a more than, less than payoff from the perspective of our model. We could talk a little bit about how the media seems to only fuel and fan the flame, where it creates these, these trigger points that turn into incendiary circumstances that ultimately become very dangerous. My whole show last night was really helping us find ways for calmer heads to prevail and for us to reconnect to love. So I just want to reinforce that tonight. I'm not saying it to be superficial or to offer platitudes. I really believe that us tapping into the truth and beauty of who we are and committing to understand that there's truth and beauty in almost every person, and trying to see if we can reach out and appeal to that truth and beauty in other people and come together. So that's the undertone for what we're doing tonight, and if any of the questions are related to that, I would love to tackle those as well. So question number one, this is from Trish in Florida. I would consider myself an agnostic, and yet I'm very curious about God and heaven and life after death and all that stuff, she says. What do you think is the most honest and effective path to spiritual discovery and awakening? Again, I'm glad I qualify this and say that these are my opinions and not necessarily those of WZML 92.9 in Bryn Mawr. These are my opinions, and I do have, I think, a strong answer for this, and I would love your feedback. But what is the most honest and effective path to spiritual discovery and awakening? Well, first of all, there's processes, to discovery, and there's different processes that work for everybody. And I think because we are fundamentally different, some processes will work better for you than for others. Even if you consider Eastern philosophy versus Western philosophy, when you talk about science and the pursuit of knowledge through the scientific methodology and empiricism versus Eastern spirituality or Eastern mysticism, I think that both present the possibility for pathways to truth, but also both the web of scientific empiricism has many holes in it, and it certainly doesn't explain everything. Certainly not everything is explained by science. Some things are way beyond science, and science has not caught up yet, but in its very detailed and just the detailed way that science pursues that knowledge and has that commitment for deeper truth, and is not so arrogantly presupposing that theories are facts, that they might be supplanted or or reinforced or added on to or changed in ways. And so just this pursuit of knowledge where we're always looking for a deeper and deeper truth. And that being said, that also the pathway through science can be remarkably painstakingly slow. And there, in that process, there could be a lot of people suffering while they're waiting for truth, while they're waiting for more evidence, while they're waiting for proof. And sometimes there's just enough evidence that even if science can't prove it, that evidence might provide relief or comfort or something meaningful to people's lives. And so for me, it's like I try and balance these two. And I co-authored a book with a brilliant neuroscientist who incorporated these two things very well, where he was trained in science and yet was very interested in religion and mysticism and spirituality, and did his best to sort of fuse the two into an ideology, a philosophy, and a way of looking at the world, which then we turned into a therapeutic model. Now, again, so I'm talking about the limitations of science. I'm talking about how this incredibly painstaking process can really still end up having people suffer. But then you go in the other direction, and oftentimes people that dive in, that they're too trusting, they don't have enough evidence, that they're, W.C. Fields said there's a sucker born every minute. And so, it really is about balancing this. I mean, we have a preference for our own spiritual experiences, our own physiological experiences. And so these experiences don't necessarily mean that we have knowledge or fact, or that we can guarantee some reality exists just because we have an experience. Because the human brain is really good at creating meaning for these experiences that we have, trying to create some version of the God in the gaps or explanations for things just simply because we don't understand them. Then it must be based on my cultural paradigm, my education, and my understanding. I have to pluck something from something that I know and fill the gap with that something that I know, and that filling the gap might be completely wrong. As a matter of fact, we have to have the humility that even though we have found, we believe, a core mechanism in the brain that we call the missing link of human behavior, we still have to have the humility to go, we might be wrong. Now, as it applies to how we've been helping people, as we incorporate the therapy and the coaching, for most people, it seems to be the most effective thing that they've ever tried. But from a scientific perspective, the things that we're claiming that specifically we say happen in the brain and in the way that they happen, we can't know that for sure. We just don't know that for sure. So science has its limitations, but of course spirituality has its limitations, and people are vulnerable to get hurt either way. And here we are looking for ways to not get hurt, but to grow, to evolve, to heal, to become enlightened, to raise our awareness and consciousness. I mean, we're looking for more, for meaning, for purpose, right? I mean, give you an example. My daughter went to India and told me the story of where she and her girlfriends found this, really this most remarkable man, this guru, that he was a yogi and a guru, and I guess he had a good reputation. I'm not sure how they found him. But he had these 4 beautiful young girls, and so he started talking to them in his guru-ish ways, and like I might do. And he then, at some point, proceeded to give them a hug. And as he hugged my daughter, she describes it after the fact that she felt this amazing experience, this opening, this awakening, this energy, and I might be adding my own interpretation the way I remember, but like her knees buckled, but it was like this profound experience just hugging this guru. And so wouldn't that be a wonderful end to the story, that somehow she had this experience and it made her believe more deeply and open her pursuit and her mind to spirituality in a way that she might have been, avoiding previously or not aware of or not motivated to do. But he proceeded then at some point, as he was teaching them about chakras, and then he sort of laid all 4 girls down on the ground and then started touching them in different areas that they were curious about, but, showing them, presenting energy in their different chakras. And I guess as he started on the base chakra, he touched them in places that certainly could be considered inappropriate. I mean, not overly obvious, or they would have got up and ran away, but suspicious, let's say, as the spiritual teacher was, helping awaken these young ladies. And then he moved up to the chakra, the next chakra, and then I guess he came to the heart chakra, and instead of placing his hand on the heart, he one by one placed his hands on the young girls' breasts. And I think they all, they already had this experience with them, and they're not really sure. I mean, this feels wrong, but they're not really sure. Is this some creepy dude that's using spirituality as a way to feel up and cop a feel from young girls? Well, from a dad's perspective, of course, you're going to understand how I see it. Yeah, it's just a creepy dude. And he might have had wonderful, amazing spiritual connection in some way. And yet, does that mean he's fully enlightened? Does that mean that this guy is not vulnerable like every other human animal to the drives and desires of the ego, of the flesh? And clearly in his case, it was true that he was not somehow able to transcend this, that he was vulnerable. And I'm never trying to put down Gandhi or people like that. I mean, I think they did remarkable things, but when you look at remarkable people, please don't put them on a pedestal, whether Barack Obama, Donald Trump, or Gandhi or Buddha or whatever, because they're still human. They still live in the flesh. They still have the same brain. They still have vulnerabilities. And yes, we can raise our consciousness with a lot of work. And I'm going to get back to the spirituality question. But yes, we can raise our consciousness. Yes, we can become more aligned. Yes, we can become more grounded in ethics and morality and achieve emotional self-mastery. Yes, spirituality, blah, blah, blah. And yet, please use your common sense. People are people. And all of us are vulnerable at times of weakness for inappropriate behavior that would be driven by the ego, or what we call with our model, the addiction persona. And so in this case, this guru might have been a remarkably gifted guru, might have had some sense of mastery over energy and been able to manipulate that energy in a way for great good. But, then he starts to feel the breasts of these 4 young women, and he ruins their entire experience. In a sense, they came back because they're good sports, and it became this funny story that they could tell their friends, and everybody had a good laugh, but it could have also been a magical experience instead of just a funny story. And so, again, I just want you to be, well, what is spirituality then? If it's not meditating 8 hours a day and being a guru in some ashram in India or whatever, what is spirituality? Well, I think there's a lot of behaviors. I think there's a lot of things that people engage in that for them fuel their spirituality, inspire them, motivate them to step deeper, create these experiences. And so for some people, that might be meditation. And I can say personally for me that meditation has created the most profound experiences of my life. On par, or in a sense, maybe even exceeding the birth of my children, which was magic beyond magic. And so these meditative experiences for me, if you've read my books or ever heard me tell this story, meditation for me is where the seminal, the core ideas of this new model, this unified model of human behavior came from. Just this magical sort of download, this epiphany where my hair stood on end, and if I was a religious person, I would have said I was full of the Holy Ghost, because there was so much bliss, so much of something in my body that was so overwhelming. And then tears started pouring out of my eyes, but not tears of sadness, but like tears of bliss. I couldn't describe it. There wasn't words for it. And then this tapping into knowledge that exceeded my intellect, that exceeded my education. This is a profound spiritual experience. How do you have something like this and then it not reinforce or deepen your belief? And we have a preference to these types of personal experiences. And so I wish all the non-believers, and I mean non-believers, atheists, that just say there's no chance, there's no way, and they have all the science to prove it. I respect atheists. I'm not an atheist. I'm still an agnostic. Well, what does it mean to be an agnostic? I mean, I'm still searching. And I think somehow I'll be searching. To me, the ultimate in arrogance is to think that I know for sure one way or the other something that is not knowable, and yet you would have to say that there's been some people that have known for sure on both sides of the aisle, the smartest scientists in the world, some of them claim to know for sure. To me, that's the ultimate in arrogance. And then I'm sure that if you could have a chance to talk to Jesus Christ while he was still alive, or Buddha while he was still alive, or that they would know for sure, just on the other end of the spectrum. I don't know if you have to become completely enlightened. I mean, the type of magical experience I'm talking to you about through this meditation, where I felt no weight, where all of my hair was standing on end, where I was so full of some joy, bliss, and then tapped into some sort of intelligence and downloading things into me that didn't translate in words, that as soon as I left the meditation and tried to write down in text, that it didn't translate to language. It was a different type of communication, visual, sensory. It was just, if I could describe it the most effectively, I would say it was like yes, it felt like an epiphany, and yet not an intellectual epiphany of like, oh, I get it. Almost more like, oh, right, I remember that. I remember that. And then in my remembering of that, I also sort of remembered who and what I am at a deeper level. I remembered all this information that led to the ultimate creation of this incredible model of understanding human behavior, but I also understood me. I understood who I was, what I was at a deeper level. And yet the rational scientific mind then still has this little bit of doubt, like, but maybe you're just kind of crazy. You know, Joan of Arc was 15 or 16 years old, and apparently after the fact, they probably discovered that she had schizophrenia, and yet she led the French to overthrow whatever. You have to, even when you have these remarkable experiences, you have to kind of ask yourself and qualify and re-qualify and reinforce and deepen the belief. And so I think, in terms of my pursuit of spirituality, that I'll probably be looking and experiencing till the day I supposedly die or transition to the next phase of life. And I hope I just do it with courage and equanimity and openness and gratitude and excitement. I hope I do it with real care. And so if we could talk about meditation, for me, that's been the most powerful. And yes, I prayed. I was raised by a religious family up until a young age. Well, that's not really accurate. I was raised by religious grandparents. My parents weren't religious. They actually resisted religion, but I was still exposed to it. And so on my knees praying and so on and so forth. I've been through that at younger ages. And then just kind of arbitrary experiences. And again, I'm talking about experiences first because I think those will be the most effective things that will allow somebody to step into spirituality. Your experience is going to be the thing that convinces you the most. You know, if all of a sudden you just started talking in tongues or whatever and levitated, I'm sure that would impress upon you in some way that there's something beyond this three-dimensional reality. You might not know exactly what that is, but something up there, right? And so even when I was a boy, and this is almost embarrassing, I've got my internal dialogue right now, but I've always promised to have an open, honest dialogue with the listeners. But my internal dialogue right now is saying, don't say this, don't tell them this, what are you, nuts? But because now you're just going to know I'm crazy. But when I was a little boy, not only was I physically abused a fair amount, but I was, after my mother left my father and I was 4 years old, approximately, what had happened is the abuse got worse, but also sort of the neglect and isolation. I think beyond the abuse, what I remember feeling as my mother took my 3 brothers away is, first of all, in a sense, why was I left behind? Sort of the throwaway child. But maybe more importantly, what I remember the most is just being outside as a 4 and 5, 6-year-old boy by myself all the time, just always alone, out with an apple and a sweater and just walking around or skating on the lake, or at least that's how I remember it, right? Now, I think we probably remember more painful negative things than we do positive things, and so this is just my memory, and I'm sure that it's very subjective. That being said, I remember one time sitting on my auntie's lawn alone, what felt like for hours, just sort of staring up at the clouds and sitting there, kind of in a way connecting with nature. And again, here it comes. And I saw, I think, God's hand. Now, my interpretation after the fact, as somebody who loves science, is that this was a fantasy of a little boy and a memory that might have been deposited later or after the fact, or a dream or something. But I remember being there, and I remember the hand coming through the clouds, and I might have just willed it in my loneliness and trying to feel a sense of importance, trying to feel seen or validated like I mattered. But God's hand came through the clouds and touched me on the shoulder. God's giant hand. And so somehow, that really had a huge impact on me spiritually. Somehow I felt my whole life, even though I was abandoned, even though I was left behind, even though I was abused, I felt important. I felt purposeful. I felt like I was supposed to do something big and meaningful. And, when you start to look for reasons to be spiritual, opening your mind and leaving space for the possibility of, whatever. And I think I've always done that because of those young experiences, that I've always left room for the possibility of magic or miracles. I've always loved the idea of magic and miracles, whether you wanted to call it religion, God, or whatever else, or just mysticism, or just science, or things that we don't understand, but magic and mysticism, yeah. And so, fast forward to the age of 15, and again, embarrassing, but I want to be honest and open with you guys and be transparent and vulnerable. And hopefully at some point as we build a relationship, you'll be able to do the same with me. But at the age of 15, clear compensation, there was a lot of behaviors that I was demonstrating that sort of showed I was compensating for my insecurities in early childhood. And one of them was that I had a journal, and I filled up my whole page of the journal, and it just said, "Save the planet." It's the only thing I remember in my journal. I thought about it again and again, and I told a few friends about it, and they laughed and thought, yeah, okay, Todd. And yet that was something that was connected to the touch on the shoulder, and still kind of kept that spirituality alive. I still had no religious experience, but I kept having these personal experiences. I had not really been to church more than 5 times, but I kept having these personal experiences that were hard to define, that left room for this concept of spirituality, the ethereal, magical. And so Save the Planet. Again, now, then I had meditation after meditative experience, where in one experience again, I felt like after a 45-minute meditation, I opened my eyes and everything was just colorful, different colored vibration. Everything was vibrating energy. That's all I saw was vibrating energy. And now it starts to sound like I'm just making stuff up, and you can take all of this with a grain of salt. I'm just telling you my experience. But, I could still tell it was grass. It had some sort of form, but it was green, vibrating grass. And the grass then connected to the trees, that connected to the sky, that connected to the clouds, that connected to the sun, that connected to me. And I understood in a single moment, along with that experience of everything just being vibration, I also understood in a single moment that when you heard this term that we are one, a unity, that we're all connected, I used to just apply that to people. But when I had that experience, I knew that it wasn't just all people are connected. It's that all things, everything, it's all vibration, it's all energy, it's all connected. And that I was a part of the trees, I was a part of the earth, I was a part of the rock, I was a part of the sun. And so you felt expansive. You felt like this enormous being that was set free. And yet there was some fear related to being set free. It was a remarkable experience. And so I don't want to give you all of my experiences, that there's been many that I could share with you, but I want to come back to the question. And the question is, even though considered himself she, Trish, considered herself an agnostic and curious about God and heaven and life after death. What do you think is the most honest and effective path to spiritual discovery and awakening? So, the sitting on the grass being touched by God, I wasn't meditating. But was I, in some version? Was I staring at the clouds and then just got wowed or wooed into some meditative state where this type of thing could happen for me? Then I had these, two huge experiences. Then once when I was sick on a plane, an incredible transformative experience. So I've been blessed in a sense with these experiences that allow me to keep my mind open to the possibility of this spirituality, magic, and something beyond us. And to really have some sense of real strong faith around that. But what else can you do? Certainly you could go to church, you could adopt a religion, you could pray in a variety of different ways. And I think that a lot of people that have done that will tell you that it reinforces spiritual belief, that there's some sort of periods where magical things seem to happen, where you seem to be connecting and communicating with some other source, whatever you want to call it. And so I think that can also be another way. I think also artists that really become acutely aware of form and function. Artists that pay attention to subtlety and nuance. And specifically, and not exclusively, but specifically of living things, beautiful sceneries, nature, man, woman, a flower, whatever it might be. But that they pay attention, and in meditation they do sort of the same thing. I mean, they might just meditate on the petals of a flower until they see nothingness, until they experience space and time and reality, until they feel the life throb of the ages. They might just be focusing and meditating on a flower until the flower disappears, not literally, but it becomes something other when you remove the label and you no longer see it as a flower. And then does it become vibration? Does it become God? Does it? I don't know. I've never had that experience with meditation on a flower. But so it keeps coming back to these processes that inevitably lead to personal experiences. And then it's these experiences that open the door. Now, we could go on and on and on about the different processes that do that, whether communing with nature. I mean, I've heard some people talk about scuba diving, where they just felt like when they learned how to scuba dive that they were slipping into Mother Nature. They were slipping into the womb of Gaia and sort of being rebirthed in the womb of Gaia, and then so focused on breath because they could hear it through their regulator and nobody around, and so immersed in the present moment and really attuned senses, actively scanning with their different processes the reality and the environment that the individual was in. And so that experience to them ended up becoming a spiritual experience. It deepened their belief in something magical. So there's a million ways. You might be a chemist. Like if you read any of the work by Bruce Lipton, who wrote an incredible book called The Biology of Belief. And he was in his lab and he was a cell biologist, and he was doing enucleation and working with the cellular membrane and trying to find the source. I can't remember exactly what it's about, but inevitably, as he's finds out that when you remove the nucleus from the cell, and the nucleus is considered the brain of the cell, that the cell still functioned for months and functioned where all of its organelles did what they were supposed to do, functioned in a meaningful way, like it knew what it was doing. And so he said, well, wait, if you take the brain out of any mammal or animal, the animal dies. So then, even though the DNA is in the nucleus, then the nucleus can't be the brain of the cell. If you removed it, it would die. And these cells are almost identical to us in ways. I mean, they're little mini representations of us. And so when he had that experience and then realized that it was actually the senses that sensed the environment, it was the cell membrane that sensed the environment, that was actually the brain, which was an extension of our endoderm, I think it is, like, our skin and our brain and our nervous system were sort of this first layer. They're all connected and similar. So our skin is just an extension of the brain in a sense. And so it's really it's our skin, it's our senses And so that I'm going on because it was such a cool concept. But that experience for him was God is real. Oh my God, I never believed in God. And you'll have to read the book to get a deeper understanding. But for him, it was just like this instant awakening. And he knew there was something, there was a signal, there was a messenger. And that messenger, that was the reality. Again, hard for me to explain. But so I don't know what you're going to be doing to have that experience. But what you want to do is play around with different interactions, different types of people, different types of experiences, so that you may elicit an opportunity to have that spiritual experience. And when you have the experience, your proclivity, propensity, and tendency towards belief and faith will improve and deepen and deepen. Now, as life happens and painful situations come along, you also then might lose faith. You might move away from spirituality based on whatever your belief system is. But I'm going to look at spirituality in a different way. I'm going to say, for me, the most spiritual thing you can do and the most honest and effective path to spiritual discovery and awakening is really looking at it in a sense the way that Carl Jung looked at it. And Carl Jung, he thought of Jesus Christ not only as a real person that had real experiences, that was an amazing man, but he also looked at Christ as a metaphor. So when they wrote about Christ, Jung says that when they said, I am the way, through me, I am the pathway to heaven, or I am the way to God, that what they meant was that Christ was a metaphor for the true self. Christ was a representation of the best version of you, that each of us has a true self, and that true self has Christ potential, and that when you discover your true self, that is the way, that you are the way, through you, through your true self. So Christ as the metaphor of the best of humanity, that Christ was living out of the true self, achieving his full potential, and that all of us, whether we think it's because we're smart or that we can run fast or that we are talented in this way or that way, but that our great contribution is the discovery of our Christ potential, that spiritual component where we could affect change on the entire planet. This is the version of you that I would encourage you to embody, to step into, to find that Christ potential, to find that true self. And when you're talking about the aftermath of what's happening because Donald Trump was elected, that what matters more is that there's one more Christ on the planet, sharing love, telling truth. And that the minuscule effect, potentially, there's always exceptions to the rule, but the minuscule effect that a Donald Trump might have on the planet or on the country would be small in comparison to the incredible effect of thousands of people actualizing their true self, their Christ potential. And so then to me, how do I answer this question? The most honest and effective path to spiritual discovery is the path inward, the path where the only spiritual thing you can do really is uncover, discover, reclaim, search for, find, and align your behavior with, at deeper and deeper and deeper levels, the beauty and the truth of who you really are. Just be you. Quit trying to copy other people. Quit trying to be accepted and liked, and change up who you are. Quit not showing up as you. Quit holding back. Be unabashed in the presentation of your truth and your true self. With no apologies, show up as the best version of you. Show up as the great version of you. Not as the great version of you that on some level thinks you're better than anybody else, because if they were in their true self, it would be different than your true self. It would be Buddha and Christ in the same room, equally transcendent and magnificent and fundamentally different in so many ways, but still achieving their full potential as their true self. And then those people would change the world. And those people also know that they're not better or worse than anybody else. What they're doing is just potentiating an opportunity, creating the courage, opening the door for other people so that they can step into their true self. And when enough people do that and they don't respond by fear and running away or attacking or judging or fighting, but they just find their true self and they step into the deepest parts, they have the courage to embody their true self and live from that place, that's the most spiritual thing you can do. As a matter of fact, that's really the only thing that you can do that's spiritual. Being authentic. Be you. Everything else is fake. Everything else is pretending. Everything else is diminishing. Everything else is disconnecting. Everything else is phony. Find out who you are and find the courage to be that. And know that that's extraordinary and magnificent, but no better than anybody else's true self. It might show up as more transcendent. It might show up as more evolved. But that's just circumstance. That's just how it shows up. Everybody has that same potential, waiting to be discovered, waiting to be revealed. So I hope that makes sense, Trish. How do you find your true self? We can go into that a little bit more another time, but to me, this is the most honest and effective path to spiritual discovery. Don't go to yoga or an ashram to try and be something that you're not. Don't go to yoga and act like everybody else at yoga, like you're supposed to act. Don't be the more spiritual yoga person saying Nam Myoho Renge Kyo and Namaste to everybody, unless that's just who you are. Quit trying to be some version of what looks like spiritual. Quit trying to be spiritual. There's nothing you can do to be spiritual. I don't care if you're saying motherfucker every third word, but you're authentic and you're discovering the beauty of you. And maybe you're crass, maybe you're sexual, maybe you're you, but it is authentic you, whatever it might be, it's just you. And the world has to take it or leave it, and you're okay with that because it's authentic, it's real. That's the only thing that you can do, to me, that's really spiritual. Because again, it's only through you discovering you and accepting you and embodying you that you become your Christ potential, and then through your Christ potential, through Christ, is your pathway. I hope that makes sense. Good. Nice question, though. Okay. Anybody else listening here on Facebook Live? Anybody at 92.9 WZML LP Bryn Mawr? Feel like sending a question in? I will take them right now. Live questions. You're having problems with your spouse. Your kids are doing this. You want some advice on something positive like this, spiritual discovery or whatever. I've got a model that I think helps us understand almost any area of human endeavor. I don't want to say that from a place of arrogance. I'm blessed and lucky to have been afforded the opportunity to share this with everybody else. So if you have any great questions out there, please just go ahead and type them up on the Facebook Live feed or text them to me. I gave out my number. And if not, I will move on to my next question. I listened to one of your shows a couple weeks ago, and you said that chronic pain is addiction or driven by addiction. I cannot wrap my head around that. In fact, for some reason, it really triggered me. Could you please help me understand and explain how that is possible? Yes, I can help you do that. So many people, to varying degrees, deal with, and I might even say suffer with, some level of chronic pain. And whether that's just arthritis in your pinky toe, or you had an injury when you were a kid in your knee, or this or that, or you've just always had a bad back, or you get these horrible headaches and you just got to rub them out, or whatever. Whatever that is to you. So I want to explain what I mean. So first of all, I would never say that pain is addiction or driven by addiction. I would only say chronic pain or repetitive patterns of pain. I hope you can open your mind to believe this, okay? And if you're listening and you don't believe it, also please just challenge me. Challenge me and let me deepen my explanation. So you might have gout in your papa toe, and you know that there's actual real crystals in there in the joint, and that the pain's coming from the crystals. You might have, like me, have fallen 45 feet off a roof, and if you x-ray my lower back, it looks a little bit like a mess, like the joints have fused together. Or you could see that I have, 5 pins, screws still in my ankle from having a spiral fracture and 100 fractures in the ball and socket of my foot. Now, every doctor that I've been to tells me that I'm supposed to have a lot of pain. And in my ankle specifically. Well, my back has no pain at all. And my ankle also, it definitely, if you looked at it, it's an arthritic joint. And if you look at it under a microscope or you see an x-ray of it, it's a mess. And I have been to doctors that told me that when they've seen an ankle in this state or any joint in this state, that I must need some sort of pain management protocol. And I just told my doctor, well, I don't believe in chronic pain, and I teach a model that says chronic pain is addiction. Well, he looked at me like I was crazy, as some of you may be, and as the listener who answered or asked this question probably thought. They said triggered, but they probably thought crazy. So let me explain it a little bit. So first of all, we have to come from the premise that everything that we evolved, or at least almost everything that we evolved into, was a part of a process to increase the probability of survival. Our evolution improved us in a way where survivability was enhanced. So we have to come from that premise. And so if you think about a hunter-gatherer, if you think about the vast majority of our evolution, which is an important perspective, and you think if that individual had chronic pain, had a sore back, what would happen to a hunter-gatherer that had chronic pain? You got it. Even if they had x-rays back then, and even if the hunter-gatherer said, yes, but big bear, swipe knee, break leg bad, wouldn't matter. You see, at some point, survival mandates that the body heal. And the purpose for pain, temporary pain, is so that we can be aware of the area that's injured, really important purpose, and we can protect the area that's injured, really important purpose, to increase the probability of its healing. And if it doesn't heal, the likelihood is that we will probably die. Because predators look for the weakest in the herd. And if you're back there with your chronic pain and you can't keep up with the crew, well, you're the first to go. So you can see that survival would have huge incentives and processes that would help us resolve our pain, help us heal as quickly as possible and resolve our pain. So why when somebody falls off a roof or gets in a car accident 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, and they still have pain? Evolutionarily, does that make sense to you? From a survival perspective, does that make sense to you? Well, if you've been educated and raised in a current medical model, it probably will make sense to you because you'll see some sort of evidence, some pathology, some degeneration, just some evidence that this is different than the way that it was supposed to be. So that difference means now I have justification for pain. And I think that's where we go wrong. My ankle looks different, my left ankle than my right, or my left ankle than your left ankle. And my lower back looks different, but that doesn't mean because it looks different that that becomes a justification for pain. So let me tell you what happens in the brain. So in a modern culture, and there's a lot of evidence that this did not happen to hunter-gatherers. There's a lot of evidence, and we can't prove this, but there's a lot of evidence that hunter-gatherers, in fact, didn't have chronic pain. That even when they were injured or hurt or whatever, they typically would heal. And even if they were left with a limp or this or that, or a club foot or blah, 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 that still, and it might have been impinged movement or restrictions in certain areas because of the injury, but that there was no evidence that they had this overwhelming pain. Maybe, again, if they lost mobility to some degree and then they stretched it too hard, it might hurt during that moment, but it's not like the pain would stay with them forever. And so what's happening in your brain in a modern culture, and I always have to qualify in a modern culture because physiologically we respond differently to things based on a variety of things that have changed from hunter-gatherer lifestyle to a modern-day lifestyle. And so hunter-gatherers, essentially no evidence of chronic pain or repetitive patterns of pain. Modern culture, lots of evidence of chronic pain. Almost everybody has it. And so we call it an addiction or driven by an addiction because what in fact is happening is that you have a stress response when you get injured. And whether you go through a trauma that is an emotional pain and or a physical pain, it doesn't really matter. We still have the same response to kill that pain. So without making this too complicated, because A, I'm not a doctor, and B, why make it complicated if you don't have to? What you have to understand is that there's one quirky thing that's happening. The same chemical, beta endorphin, that is our body's primary pleasure chemical, beta endorphin for all types of pleasure, for food pleasure, for sex pleasure, for connection pleasure, for entertainment pleasure, for laughter. But beta endorphin is our positive reinforcer. Beta endorphin and the good feelings that we get is a message to the brain that this is important for survival. This feel good is the positive reinforcement to say, yes, this is important for survival. That's why it feels good. Okay? And so beta endorphin is the body's primary pleasure chemical. Now, something really quirky happens. Beta endorphin is also our body's primary painkiller. Now, the tricky part of that is that when we're in pain, we get pleasure chemical. So, right, it's the same chemical, beta endorphin. It's the pleasure chemical and the painkiller. It is an opioid. And so it's very similar to heroin in a lot of ways, without the side effects. Well, unless you become addicted to it. And so because it plays two purposes, pleasure and pain killing, creation of pleasure and pain killing. Can you already see where this is going? It's subcortical. So when I feel the pain, I'm not aware that I'm taking my pleasure chemical. I'm not even aware that I'm alleviating the pain. It's a completely subcortical process, subconscious process. So I feel any type of pain, emotional and or physical pain, and I get a dose of this beta endorphin. And the brain doesn't really have the ability to tell the difference between the two. And in a modern culture, here's where the danger lies. Because typically, we can get about 2 to 5 times as much of this opioid, as much of this beta endorphin, this pleasure chemical, this painkiller, for going through and experiencing emotional or physical pain than we actually receive for our greatest pleasure. We don't even notice it again because it's subcortical. It's a subconscious process. It's an automatic process, right? And yet, when the brain and body actually get addicted to the beta endorphin, get addicted to the opioid, just like they would heroin, think about what a heroin addict goes through. The heroin addict starts to build tolerance for heroin, and then when they start to not get enough, they start to go through versions of pain. They start to feel sick or anxious or cramping or pain or nausea or something, and so it tricks the person into taking more heroin. And that's how we get deeper and deeper. That's this concept of chasing the dragon. So we get deeper and deeper into our addiction because we build up a tolerance. And we don't need to talk about what's happening on the synapses and so on and so forth. But we build up a tolerance and therefore we need more of it. And the more we take, the bigger withdrawal we get, the bigger crashes we get, and inevitably the more we need. So when you see this with a heroin addict, they just end up taking more heroin and doing it more often, if they can. But when you're talking about somebody who's dealing with chronic physical or emotional pain, can you imagine what happens to them? Now remember, this is all happening subconsciously. But if they're now addicted to the beta endorphin, they're now addicted to the internal heroin, their body starts to crave it. And if they don't get enough, and they're not getting enough through pleasure anymore because they get up to 5 times as much for pain. So now the body unconsciously, the brain unconsciously starts searching for opportunities to create pain. Now, that opportunity might just be a story. Oh, I broke my back when I was 21. And so it makes sense that I have pain there. I know this kind of sounds crazy, but then it's easy for the brain to trick that part of the body into feeling pain. And then the brain gets, when you feel the pain, the brain gets to give you a bigger dose of the painkiller, the heroin that it's already addicted to. And then that pain isn't enough. Matter of fact, you might get that back operated on because the pain's just unmanageable. It's unbearable, and you'll do everything you can to get rid of it. So you go get an operation, the doctor says, and then oddly enough, you find that your middle back now is screwed up. And I guess it must have been the operation because it's created, they fused the joints together, and that must have created a difference in the dynamics or flexibility of the rest of my spine. And so now my middle back is screwed up, and I'll have to get an operation there. And then all of a sudden I get an operation in my middle back, and the doctor says, I don't know what's going on. And then my knee starts to hurt. And then my knee starts to hurt, and then I find myself not being able to get around very well, and then I'm lying on the couch a lot watching TV because my knee starts to hurt, and then I start to feel depressed. And as I start to feel depressed, I notice myself thinking about more and more negative stuff, more and more negative stuff, more and more negative stuff. And I start to spiral downwards. You see, it doesn't matter if it's physical pain or emotional pain. Then as I'm depressed, I start fighting with my wife. And all of a sudden, my wife is threatening to leave me, and my kids are disappointed. You see, the addiction to pain continues to drive behavior, continues to drive perspective from a subconscious level to create circumstances in relationship, at workplace, where I might get hurt, where I might be able to perceive things in a way so that I can feel more and more pain, so that I can get the painkiller that I'm addicted to, which is my body's pleasure chemical, which is an opioid, which is my heroin. I don't know, I hope that makes sense, guys, but that's how we get addicted to pain. And that's how pain continues to be persistent and exacerbates. That's how after a year, instead of my pain going away, as my injury has improved, somehow I find a way to keep the injury there, or somehow I find a way to keep the pain there even when the injury's gone. So we would say then, what's chronic? And that becomes a little trickier because there are some versions of chronic pain that might not be created by addiction, but then are exacerbated and intensified by addiction. So let's say somebody's suffering with stage 4 cancer. Well, that's definitely not created by addiction, necessarily, and I don't want to get into that, but let's just pretend it's not for now. And yet, as this intense pain, and I become addicted to the pain in a lot of cases, not all, what's going to happen is I'm going to intensify the physical pain. I'm going to intensify the emotional pain. And so that can exacerbate the condition. It can intensify the condition. And it doesn't mean it necessarily created it in the first place. So I hope that makes sense. So this is a really complicated question. I hope I answered that. Guys, we are at the top of the hour, at which point I have to tell you, and I'd like to tell you, and I'm happy to tell you that you're listening to me on Facebook Live, and I love you all for tuning in. But to those of you in Philadelphia on the main line or parts of New Jersey, you're listening to WZML LP in Bryn Mawr. That's 92.9 on the main line. And the opinions that you are listening to are those of your host. That's me, Todd Ritchey, the host of Addiction in America, and not necessarily those opinions of the ownership or WZML. Thanks for tuning in. Again, you have a little button on your Facebook Live. Please ask your friends to join us if they have any questions. Tonight is just question answer night. Any questions that you have about anything related to relationships or pain or whatever, we've got a couple good questions in here so far, and I got a bunch more to go. But yeah, please feel free. I want this inevitably to become a hub where we'll be able to answer almost any question. If you're feeling despondent, if you're feeling lost, if you're feeling hopeless, please don't. It's just me right now, but I have a lot of resources. There's a lot of people that I interact with professionally, and I'm going to inevitably at some point, I will have neuroscientists and neuropsychologists and cutting edge heads of hospitals that are doing new technological advanced treatments for this and that. I will have therapists on here that are talking about alternative treatments that have some sort of empirical support, or at least a ton of anecdotal support. We'll be talking about things from plant medicines to technology to you name it, but we're not necessarily going to be politically correct. We're not necessarily going to just talk about what the establishment wants us to talk about. We're going to talk about what works. And I want people to know that if you're feeling like something doesn't work, then you just haven't looked hard enough, because I believe there's a solution for just about everything. That means yes, for all forms of mental illness, most forms of disease, there are definitely some exceptions to that rule, but for many forms of disease, and at least we can provide some comfort and potentiate deeper meaning and connection for people that do have disease, even if it's not driven by or created by addiction. And there are some exceptions to the rule there. But whether it's chronic pain, whether it's relationships, whether it's parenting, whether it's career, whether it's wealth, it doesn't matter to me. We've had a question on spirituality. I'm hoping that we can broach every single subject, and I'd like you guys to join in on the conversation. I want this to be a collaboration. I want us to share ideas, and if you know something, an answer that I don't have a great answer to, then please, jump in and let us know. Okay? So you can check us out on trilluminate.com. That's TRilluminate.com. You can go to Todd Ritchey Facebook. You'll see me broadcasting there live now. You can go to Trilluminate Inc. Facebook, and you'll be able to see recorded copies of all my Facebook posts. And you can also find us on Instagram and other forms of social media. So thanks again for tuning in. Here we are now in the back hour, in the back nine. And why don't we tackle the next question? Okay. This idea that we talked about yesterday following the discussion, maintaining homeostasis in light of cataclysmic events people are adjusting to on a national and international level. So, how to maintain homeostasis, how to respond or get back into balance when cataclysmic events happen. So an example of that today would just be the way Americans, or many Americans, half the population or more, is responding to this new president. And it seems to be cataclysmic. And the fallout and the aftermath isn't just about him being president, but then it's about how we're treating each other, how people are responding to each other, what sort of projections that we're putting on other people because they voted for this person or that person, and the casting aspersions and the overwhelming vitriol has come to a place where it's beyond incendiary and beyond hypersensitive. And so how do we get back into balance? This is a complicated question, right? And I sort of give, in a sense, generic answers that sometimes might seem repetitive in a way that I would give to a variety of different questions. The first thing here is just, again, it always comes down to understanding bigger picture, who and what we are. And I talked a little bit about that yesterday. Understanding what we are, who we are, that we are an animal, and we operate to some degree like an animal until we can start to transcend animals, or the animal physiology, the fight or flight response. So these cataclysmic events, I think part of telling the truth, part of achieving a perspective that will allow you to find some balance and some homeostasis again, is to recognize who's driving this. Who's trying to gain from this? Who wants us to be in chaos? Who wants to take the adversity and to exacerbate, to intensify, to create pure chaos, insanity, dysfunction, mistrust? Who benefits from that? Think about that question. Who benefits from that? In a capitalistic culture, you almost always have to ask the first question: who's getting paid? When something's going good or something's going bad, who's getting paid? Follow the bouncing dollar bill. And that might sound a little New World Order-ish, But I do believe that there's very intelligent people that are sophisticated enough to know how to manipulate markets, manipulate people, manipulate circumstances. Some people even say manipulate weather and those types of things. I don't believe that. But manipulate circumstances and then create fear, use fear, get people whipped into a frenzy and then take advantage of their fearful reactions. So who would benefit? Because I'm not a conspiracy theorist and I don't really want to get into conspiracy theories, even though clearly there's been some conspiracy that aren't theories, they're fact. You've got to take a bigger picture. You need to know clearly, let's talk about, at least for sure, somebody who's benefiting from this. The media. The media now is less trusted in America, maybe worldwide, but in America, where it really was sort of a last bastion of truth and hope, a last bastion of integrity and professionalism. I mean, the news, not media particularly, but the media now that's driving this is the news media. This is where we had our most trusted anchor people. You know, these are the guys that we invited into our guys and girls that we invited into our living room, that we knew that they were honorable, had high integrity, that it was all about searching for truth, that they weren't going to pick sides to the best of their ability. And they weren't going to just run a story to get points, to be the lead in the story, to be the superstar that got the first print. What do they call that? Anyways, these people wanted to come in your living room and be your best friend, be your trusted confidant, and tell you truth. Because if you could trust them, they could build a relationship where you would tune in. But it seems also that this was the least profitable part of a TV station or a radio station. The least profitable thing was the news. It seems now, and I can't say this for sure, but that competing with social media and these different types of newses, competing with the National Enquirer and Entertainment Tonight and these different type of news mediums, and watching people flock to these types of news, that the mainstream news now is all turning into, it's like when Phil Donahue had to compete with Sally Jesse Raphael and Geraldo and Jerry Springer and, all of these crazy shows. And then all of a sudden, Phil Donahue, who was doing really good stuff, and if you're young, I'm sorry for using these obscure references to old people stuff, but Phil Donahue he also started doing more and more inflammatory, Maury Povich, You're the Father type programming. And we saw that from there, things started to spiral downwards, with a couple of exceptions to the rule. I actually look at Oprah Winfrey and I hold her in high esteem, because I think she's one of the people that really tried. Well, the media was just turning to rat shit. She really tried her best to, at least once or twice a week, deal with a real issue in a real open-hearted, loving way where she could create a dialogue and communication. And to me, she created a beautiful model for business and success, a beautiful model for people to come together and understand. I think that's why she did so well. And she showed up authentic. She had the courage to not try and be something other than her. Right? So we go back to these cataclysmic events, and how do we get back into balance? So we've got to first of all tell the truth, right? We need a bigger picture. So we're talking about the media is trying to clearly show the extremes, showing the worst of the Trump people and only the drama. There could be thousands of people going around, and then you're going to find the radical. You're going to find the extremist, and you're going to try and ignore everything else so that you can put that on, and then people follow up and they listen in, right? And one of our listeners just said, if it bleeds, it leads. Isn't that true on the news, right? If it bleeds, it leads. I love that. I mean, I hate that, but I love that. And so, first of all, we look at the media being the culprit that's intensifying, stirring the pot, trying to pull the puppet strings. And in fact, they're doing that because what they're doing is they're polarizing the nation. A polarized nation is good for the media that now has become the number one source of income for each of their stations, the number one source of viewership for each of their stations. And so, if we have a polarized nation, then the intensity of the resistance, the veracity with which we fight, attack, creates more drama. You see, more polarized, more drama, more vitriol, more mistrust, more real life events, more violence, more bleeding, more stories. You see, so they take the extreme scenario, the extreme circumstances, the fundamentalists, the extremely dysfunctional people that are trying to already drive a narrative, and the news adopts that narrative, and the news starts to drive that narrative, and all of a sudden, racism in America is worse than it's ever been. And that's ridiculous. Go into the workplace. Look at how many interracial couples there are and how many interracial children there are. It's just so crazy to believe what crap the media is pitching. That somehow you've got to, first and foremost, broaden your sources. That if you're a Republican and all you do is listen to Fox News and Howard Stern and Rush Limbaugh, well, I'm sorry, but you're not getting a very diverse perspective of reality. And then on the other end, if all you're listening to is NPR and what would be the other NPR, maybe CNN, whatever it might be. There's reading certain newspapers that might be more liberal than, you're just reinforcing belief systems. And so now we're adopting these ideologies and we're starting to see evidence on the news. It's like, oh, look at all those black kids pull that guy out of the car. See, black people are this. And then I'm over here. Well, look at those bankers, those rich white bankers, those bastards that don't care. Look at them, and then nothing happens to them. And we just, it's not that these things aren't happening. They're real. They're happening. But we're trying to make it like they're commonplace. We're trying to make it like this is the norm. And it's not. It's the exception to the rule. And so when you go out and meet your black friends, Chinese friends, Mexican friends, Latin friends, white friends, or whatever, you go into the workplace, it's not that people are hiding all of this animosity under their breath and just waiting for a guy like Trump to come along so they have the courage to express their racist ideology. That's not really what's happening. Yeah, there's some people that were waiting for Trump to come along so that they could express their racist ideology. And that's what the news is going to show now. So now you're going to see the N-word painted on somebody's car, or you're going to see the N-word in a bathroom, or you're going to see misogynist statements or men just bumping into women and attacking them because of their feminist philosophy and ideology. But you're going to see it on both sides. But you're only seeing a fraction of reality. And you're believing it like it's reality. See, here's the same thing's been happening to people in the African American community forever. They've been misrepresented. See, we on the news for 20, 30 years just keep showing more black violence, more gang violence, more black on black crime, more, we just keep showing that. If it's a rapist, we're going to make sure it's a mugshot of a black guy. Even when we have these reality TV shows, is it somehow coincidental that you're going to get the worst stereotypical representation of an African American on one of these shows? I hate to say it, but I don't think it's coincidental. It's all about ratings. And if you fit the stereotype so that people can either align with you and love you or hate you, then we create the polarity and we intensify the viewership, we intensify interest. And so we're all getting suckered. We're all getting suckered because most people, the vast majority of people, black, white, red, yellow, men, women, are decent, yeah, afraid, yes, irrational, but decent, loving, kind, good people. Now, how do you diffuse after cataclysmic events? Well, first of all, you got to commit to discovering the truth. You know, if there's an earthquake, and that's a cataclysmic event, and let's say the earthquake is done, it would be good to know if there's going to be an aftershock or 2 or 3 or 4, because if there is, then that would change my behavior. If the earthquake is done, I need to go and start helping find people and dig them out of the rubble and whatever it is, make sure my family's okay and call people up and blah, blah, blah. But if there's going to be multiple aftershocks, so who can I find out? Does anybody know that information? You see, you got to look for truth. You need to use your rational brain. When we make decisions based on emotion, especially if that emotion is driven by fear, 9 times out of 10, you're making the wrong choice. You're going to overreact. You're going to make the wrong assumptions. You're going to cast aspersions. You're going to project onto other people. You're going to become a part of the problem. You're going to judge other people. And then you're going to start teaching your children, see what they're like? You see what they're like? The cops are bad. The white people are bad. They just want to oppress. It's all silliness. It's just childish. We are taking the extremes. We are taking the outliers and believing the piece of crap media that just wants to sell you and sucker you. And they don't care about this country. They just care about ratings. Do you get that about man? That it isn't black man, white man, woman? Do you get that? It's power is the greatest addiction of all. Power. And how to get it and how to keep it. And if I have to keep you down to keep it, and I'm an unconscious person, then I'm going to find a way to do that. And if you don't have the power, you're going to find a way to see if you can get some power. And it doesn't matter what color you're in. There's the haves and the have-nots. The people that have power and access and the people who don't, that are disenfranchised. And the people in power of whatever color are going to treat the people out of power pretty shitty, generally speaking, throughout the world until we raise our consciousness. The men in power are going to treat the women without power and try and maintain that disparity until we achieve some sort of consciousness and see that that doesn't work. That when you have a more than and a less than, when you have a have and a have not, inevitably you're going to have conflict. Now, when you mix media into the mix that just wants to exacerbate and intensify the circumstances, you've got a problem. So you first have to go to the core of who you are. You have to know the who and what you are, and you have to know what's happening in your reality. You've got to have a sense of how do human beings behave. What is your culture like? And when you can start to understand all of these things, you can start putting the pieces together. When you're triggered not even by what you think is fear, but by animosity, resentment, and hatred, your belief systems are misguided. You've been hurt on some level, and you have every right to feel some emotion. But there's this thing called the sadistic impulse. And when I've been hurt, and every human has it, doesn't matter what color, race, religion, or creed, or sex you are, brains work the same way. So we all have this thing called the sadistic impulse. As you as a group, or you as a sex, or you as a this or that start to act inappropriately, you become threatening, you become judgmental, you start to become hurtful in your dialect, in your style of behavior, in your whatever it is, you start to become threatening or hurtful. Well, it triggers this sadistic impulse in me. And then on some level, unless I'm more conscious and more rational, if I'm an average human being, then I just want to hurt you back. Even when we hurt ourselves on some level, you walk by this fireplace and you stub your toe. Don't you want to punch the closest person? You know, we have this thing when we're in pain that we just want to lash out. We have this thing called the sadistic impulse. And so the most sick people on the planet typically are the people that have been through the most pain, because when you're in great, great pain, you want to lash out and hurt other people. So it doesn't make sense to live in the dynamics of a more than and a less than. It doesn't make sense to have haves and have-nots, because the have-nots are going to be in pain. And then they're going to have a sadistic impulse and they're going to want to lash out. And as they lash out, they're going to act in certain ways that are going to reinforce prejudices and narratives and stories that the more thans already have. And so these people that already have the power now are becoming threatened by you, and they then are hurt and they get the sadistic impulse and they have more power than you do, and then they come in and crush you. We just got to get this. We got to get smarter. I just watched an incredible movie last night, and I'm sorry that I forget the name of it, but it was a foreign film made in the Netherlands, and it was about the Netherlands in the 1660s, and about an admiral that ended up having to fight against the British Navy, Germany, and France all at the same time. And the paranoia and the fear, you could see in this movie, the only thing that mattered, these people didn't give a crap about the country. That's all pretend. It's all a show. Wrapping themselves up in a flag and pretending they care about the country. Whether it was the British monarchy, whether it was the German monarchy, whether it was the French monarchy, all they wanted is more power. We haven't changed so much. Now, it's interesting and ironic that the Netherlands was the only republic in Europe at the time. It was the first republic in Europe where people voted. They had a say. They felt empowered. And the monarchies were threatened by the concept of a republic. Like America's a republic, and Britain was threatened by your concept of a republic. And so we think that we are attached to these, the Constitution and these core, critically important aspects of being American or being human. And we think that the people leading the way care as much as we do about that. And in some cases, maybe they do. But you have to understand that the biggest, most powerful, most counterproductive, most damaging addiction of all is the addiction to power. And that when you get addicted to power, you cannot help but abuse that power. You're inevitably always going to abuse that power. So right now we've given the media a lot of power. And you see, the way that they intensify or increase their power is by creating a narrative or a story that makes you afraid. And when you're afraid, you start to act in certain ways. And the people in power are going to get something out of the way that you're acting. Either they get an excuse to come in and crush you, or they get an excuse to reinforce a stereotype so that they can still keep you down. Again, I talked about last night reading the book called The Iron Fist, and these types of protests that turn potentially into riots are oftentimes planned by the elite, by the people in power, so that they can be justified in sending in the troops, some version of that, and they can also be justified in strengthening their narrative of the type of people that you are. Animals, savages, some sort of narrative, and then they'll connect it to IQ, and then they'll connect it to this or that, so that they can keep separating us further and further. And they'll have their little scientists telling stories about our superiority and your inferiority, and will be more and more driven apart to be the haves and the have-nots, and the more thans and the less thans. And so how we operate and how we act during these cataclysmic events is more important than how we act when the media has got nothing to promote. It's when the cataclysmic events happen, that's when we need to galvanize. That's when, if religion and spirituality and the meditators and the mothers and the lovers need to get together, and we need to preach peace and truth. We need to effectively assess the environment and tell the truth about the environment. To call Donald Trump becoming president cataclysmic, in fact, is premature. Yes, the response and the fallout and the aftermath has been cataclysmic, but that's because of the way that the whole thing was set up. That's the way that we were set up. Like dominoes, ready to be knocked over. We knew it was going to happen one way or the other, the way that things were going, one way or the other. If Hillary would have got in, you would have had Trump supporters in the streets. Just intensifying our differences and polarizing the country. Making us believe that everybody's an extremist when there's just such a small fraction. It's the same sort of thing with the terrorists. We want to, there's a terror attack and that's cataclysmic. And so what we'd like to do is have the leadership tell us the truth, but instead what they do is intensify, and they basically make you feel on some level like every Muslim is a terrorist. When of course it is a small percentage. Not that it's not dangerous, not that it's not something that should be dealt with, not that it's not something that's real, and we need to look at it. We can't stick our head in the sand. So I think that's how we have to deal with it, guys. It's always about first telling the truth, remembering who you are, not believing the lies, don't trust the media, and then commit to come together. But you got to assess the environment. Make sure that it's safe. It's okay to step outside. There's not a zombie apocalypse, so we can step outside, tell the truth, and quit being hyper-reactive. And then the other thing that you have to do is you learn how to, when you're the rational one,